Okay, so today there's another short story in the entry. It's called Ibeji. Essentially, Ibeji translates to English as the twin statues, right? So the story is about in the beginning, right? Let's just get into it. In the beginning, right? There was God, right? And then God created the earth. And then in the earth, he placed this race of extremely intelligent beings. Their name is the Jonus. Jonus. Jonus, right? Okay, cool. So the Jonus were placed on earth, right? Um, and as time, for the first 1,000 years of their existence, they were very, very content. They loved the earth. They loved everything about it. But they started multiplying. Like every species, they started mating and they started multiplying. And, as they started multiplying, they discovered that certain groups of Jonus started emerging, essentially. There were some Jonus that learned that, they had an affinity for land. They just like spending most of their time on land. And there was another set of Jonus that they didn't really care too much about land. They just liked water, right? They like to swim in the ocean. They like to dive really deep. They just like to live in water, essentially. And then there were some Jonus that were just like, they didn't care about land. They couldn't give two fucks about water. They just cared about the sky. They wanted to exploit the heavens, the sky, and just like stay there as long as they could. Now, remember, these are very intelligent beings. So they came to, one day they called a meeting and they had like this very amicable agreement that, you know what, let's just split into three. The guys that want to stay, that love land so much, will live on land. The guys that, that love the water so much will build their own empires inside the water. And then the ones that like to live in the sky, they build all these floating sky cities. And that seemed like a pretty good idea, so that's what they did, right? So essentially, the Jonus were split into three. The sky Jonus, the land Jonus, and the water Jonus. Okay, cool. Now, the land Jonus, right? They were very fascinated with land, but what they were most fascinated with land, was trees. They really, really loved trees. And they were not content with, building houses with trees. No. They actually wanted to live inside of those trees. Now, why would they want to live inside of trees? Well, because they knew that their population was going to keep increasing and they would run into this. And, the amount of land, unlike water, sky is infinite on Earth, right? There's sky everywhere on this planet, right? Water is like 70% of the Earth. And then land is like about 30%, right? 29 or something percent, right? So they knew that out of the three groups, they were the most disadvantaged because they had the smallest, their home was the smallest essentially. So how do you optimize for that? So they came up with a brilliant idea. The idea was that, you know what, they were going to shrink themselves into like bite sizes, like nano sizes, and then live inside trees. Do you understand? They will hollow out trees and then live inside it. And that would mean, that would mean that like one tree could house about 1 billion land Jonus, right? One tree could house like 1 billion land Jonus, right? And there are millions of trees on the planet, so their population could really go from, they could literally be hundreds of billions of like Jonus living on Earth. So that's how they solved their disadvantage, their population problem, right? And, everybody applauded them for that innovation. The Sky Jonus were like, oh, that's pretty impressive, the Water Jonus, they were like, oh, that's really, really nice. They applauded them for the innovation and everybody was like, this is nice. Okay. Now, as time went on, right, the Sky Jonus, because, again, they were in the sky and they were fascinated with the sky, they were also not only fascinated with the sky, they were fascinated with space, essentially, right? So they had these very advanced telescopes that was just scoping out the whole of space. And after about 1,200 years of like the Jonus splitting into three, right? The Sky Jonus, they made like an astounding discovery. They discovered that the universe was actually mirrored, right? So which means the universe was divided into two. And it was identical. One side of the universe was identical to the other side of the universe, which means all the planets and the galaxies on one side of the universe was also were also present on the other side of the universe. So there was universe. There was so essentially. Now, what the implications of that was that, if everything on one side of the universe is also present on the other side of the universe, then it means the universe is a twin. The Earth is everything in the universe. Everything in the universe is a twin. Do you understand? So Mars, it means that Mars would have a twin on the other side of the universe. Earth would have a twin on the other side of the universe. Our solar system would have a twin on the other side of the universe, right? So they made that stunning discovery. And before long, surprise, they actually located our twin solar system. Exactly, our own solar system. Exactly. And they found the same way all the planets are arranged in our solar system. The same thing, Earth was still the third planet in the other side of the universe, right? So they shared that discovery with the rest of the Jonas, right? They shared it with the Jonas in the water, and they shared it with the Jonas on land, right? And everybody was really excited because now they had this other home, right? They had found this other home. But there was a problem, right? The problem was the Earth was all the way on the other side of the universe, right? And how are they going to get there? How do you can't outsmart space. You can't outsmart time. You can't outsmart distance, There's nothing you can do about that. So the Sky Journals, so that was a problem for a while. How do we get to this other Earth? How do we get there in time? How do we, how do we not spend like 1,000 light years trying to get there? How do we get there quickly in our lifetime? So they quickly discovered that they made another outstanding discovery. They discovered that their chances of like getting there physically was like nearly impossible. I mean, they could see the Earth from a distance, but they could not explore it, right? The only way they could do that meaningfully was through dreams, in their dreams, right? So they discovered that a dream was essentially just a simulated version of reality that you could influence. Think of them as like a lucid dream, right? So you could control your dream, and in your dream you could travel, right? You could actually travel. So for instance, they discovered that if you are in let's say you are in one continent on Earth, let's say you are in Asia, right? And you wanted to travel to America, right? You could actually do that in your dream. Like you could close your eyes, dream about traveling from Asia to America, and just basically explore it. A dream was a portal for you to like actually travel, right? Dreams were a form of travel. Do you understand? So they made that discovery, and they quickly discovered that for you to be able to like influence your dream, right? To be able to like travel in your dream, do dream travel, not time travel now, a dream travel, right? You needed certain hallucinogenics to do it, right? You needed a special type of hallucinogenic to do it, right? That hallucinogenic was called Kaun, 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 right? So they needed Kaun, right? So when you consume Kaun, you fall asleep, but you are not really asleep. Your mind is very, very active, but you enter a dream state. So it's almost as if you are fully awake in your dream, right? It's like lucid dreaming on steroids, right? So that's what they discovered. Now the problem with that, so now Kaun is actually the bark of a tree. It was actually the bark of a tree. Was actually the bark of a tree, right? And it was very, very scarce on Earth, right? It was just some certain trees that had Kaun in it, right? Right. Now, unfortunately for them, right, the Iwis that lived on ground, right? About the same time when the Iwis that lived in the sky made the discovery about Kaun and how they could use Kaun to like dream travel, right? Do intergalactic dream traveling, right? They also discovered that you could also the Earth was a twin, right? And you could also travel from one part of the Earth to from one Earth to the other Earth, right? And you could do that um, by cutting down one tree. Now, when you cut down a tree, right, a tree has like circles inside of it. There are lines inside of a tree. All these circular lines inside of a tree, right? Now, usually those lines tell the age of the tree, right? So if you cut down a tree and you see like, I don't know, 10 lines, then it means that the tree is like, let's say 10 years old, right? But now that's the normal scientific explanation. But because the Jonus on land, the Jonus essentially were so intelligent, they discovered that the lines were not just like they were not just to tell the age of the tree. It was actually a serial number, right? It was actually a number, kind of like the way people had phone numbers, right? And if you knew somebody's phone number, you could dial them no matter what part of the world they were, right? So that's how the world also worked, right? If you wanted to teleport to the other side of the universe, right? You would cut down a tree on this side of the universe and get the serial. Read the rings in that tree, the tree rings, right? And then that will be the serial number. And then you dance around it. You do a certain dance around that pattern in accordance with the number of rings that the serial number you got essentially from the tree. And then you will automatically be transported to the base of that tree, that same type of tree on Earth B, right? So I'll take that again. If you cut down the tree on Earth A, you read the rings of it, and then you dance around it in the pattern according to the serial number that you find inside of it. You will be teleported to Earth B, right, at the base of that tree. Because why is that possible? Well, it's possible because the Earth is a twin, and everything, as above, so below, essentially. What is mimicked in one world is mimicked in the other world, right? But the problem is when you get to Earth B, the tree that you just reversed would be dead, because you've used it. It's a one-way thing, right? And if you wanted to come back, you'd have to like repeat the other process on that part. And God help you, the tree that you're teleporting to must not have been cut down. If not, the teleportation would not work, essentially. Now, so this was like a top secret for the Inuits that lived on ground. They didn't share it with the rest of the Jonus that lived on land, right, in trees. They didn't share it with like the rest of the Jonus that lived in the sky or the Jonus that lived in water. They did not share that bit of secret with them. They just kept it to themselves. And they did a couple of experiments. It's kind of like how America sent people to the moon. They sent a couple of like Jonus. They cut down one tree. They read the rings, translated into a serial number, and then did the dancing around it. And then they were teleported to the other world, to Earth B, right? But when they got to Earth B, they found it hard to like come back because the Earth on the other side of the universe, we'll get to that in the future. Let's just save that, right? Great. So let's go back to the Jonus that lived in the sky, right? So the Jonus that lived in the sky today, they had already discovered this other Earth too, like I said, and they had seen it, and they discovered that the only way to get there the way they thought they could get there was through dreams. They would sleep, and then, they would take this hallucinogenic called Count, and, they could dream travel through time and space in that dream, in no time, and get to that planet and explore the planet in their dream, Earth B in their dream, right? But there was a problem. Like I said, Count is a sap that comes from a tree bark, right? And that wouldn't have been a problem, but that's a problem because, the Jonus that live on land, they also live in trees, right? So if you need Count, right, and, to do dream travel, you need an immense amount of Count to do it. Like, it's a crazy amount of Count to do it. It's crazy, right? So they needed to cut down a lot of trees, essentially, and extract the bark of those trees and, process the sap from those trees and then, use it as the hallucinogenic Count, right? So a conflict quickly ensued between the Inuits the Jonus that lived on land and the Jonas in the sky, because the Jonas in the sky, they needed this counting for, you know, advancing their civilization and advancing their, you know, their space, um, their space travel essentially. And the Jonas that lived on land, well, they were destroying their homes because they lived in trees, right? You can't just be cutting down all these trees because, you know, that is their house, that is where they live in, you know. So it started as just a few disagreements, like, oh, you can't cut down this tree. If you cut down this tree, you know, starting millions of Jonas live in this tree, you are destroying their homes. And you are not only are you destroying the homes, you are destroying future homes that, you know, that they are going to live in, right? So not only can you cut down the trees that are occupied, you can't cut down trees that are unoccupied too, because if you did that, you'll be destroying the homes of the Jonas too. You'll be destroying their future homes too. It's like, you know. So it was a little bit of a skirmish between the two of them, and then as time went on, right, it became like a cold war, right? So the Jonas will like come down, cut down a tree. The Sky Jonas will come down, cut down a tree, extract the crown, go back to their planet, and then the Land Jonas would take revenge. They would go and destroy one of the floating sky cities of the Sky Jonas, right? Because, you know, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, you know. So that went on for a while until it became unbearable and it became a full-scale war. Now, the Jonas that lived in water, right, they initially tried to play like an intermediary, you know. They tried to be neutral in the beginning, right? And they were trying to like, you know, they try to be like the peacemaker. You're like, you know, war is not the answer. Violence is not the answer. We can settle this amicably, yada, yada, yada. But very quickly, it didn't work. So they had to pick a side. So eventually, they picked a side. And they supported the Land Jonas, right? They were like, you know what? It's not that deep. It's not that deep. Stop cutting down their trees. Stop disturbing. Don't destroying their house, yada, yada, yada. So they supported them. And then, so it was 2 versus 1, right? So the war became very intense, and the Sky Jonas, right, they discovered very quickly that they were going to lose, right? Because now they were fighting 2 people. They were fighting the Land Jonas, and they were fighting the Water Jonas, and there was no way on earth that they were going to win. So, you know, they made up, you know, so there's this saying, if I can't have you, nobody can, right? Right. So they said, you know, that's the best thing. So if we cannot have our account for space travel, then you people cannot, let's all stop existing altogether. So what did they do? They nuked the earth. They destroyed everything. They destroyed the sky. They destroyed the water. They destroyed the land. They destroyed everything. They nuked the whole earth, right? And including themselves. So that was the end of the Jonas, the race of the Jonas, right? So when that happened, of course, God was aware. God was like, what just happened? Well, surprise, surprise. They've destroyed themselves. Now, God wasn't kind of surprised about that. God knew they were going to kind of do that. So, and God had a plan B. And God's plan B was human beings. So God came, and the Spirit of God was upon the waters. And God said, let there be light. And there was light. And then God made another species. But this time, He didn't make the species extremely intelligent. He made the species, they were not extremely dumb and they were not extremely intelligent. They were just in the middle, you know. They were kind of dumb and they were kind of intelligent. Now, that species was called man. It was called mankind. And He made man and put man on the same planet called Earth. And Earth was like the same design, you know, same planet, same everything. Right. So fast forward to, and man, you know, man thrived on Earth, essentially. Again, man is not very, very smart, and man is not very, very dumb. Man is just in the middle. Mankind is just in the middle, right? Right. So fast forward to the year 2000, right? So in the year 1999, actually, sorry. In the year 1999, in May 1999, essentially, a boy was born to a family, right? A family in America. A boy was born to a family in America. In Milwaukee, in America. Let's use Milwaukee. His name is Paul. His name was Paul, right? Now, Paul comes from a very wealthy home. They're very wealthy. And his family, every summer, they would travel the world. They'll pick a country. Everybody will get on on a plane and they would travel the world. Now, initially they did it with on private planes, but they quickly discovered that, private plane traveling in a private jet was very isolating. They would not meet new people, they would not get to interact with new people, which was basically the reason why they were traveling in the first place, right? So they decided to stop that culture of like traveling in a private jet. So instead of traveling in a private jet, they would just hire like they would just like buy tickets on one flight, and everybody in the family would fly in that plane, both nuclear and extended. So they had that practice for a while, until one day they decided to board a flight, right? Now this flight is called flight MH35, right? Right? So everybody in the family booked the flight. Now Paul was also supposed to book the flight at the time, but he had SAT to write, so, and he hadn't been doing well in school, so he told Paul to his teachers advised that they shouldn't, they should cut down his playtime, cut down on his game time, just keep him in the house, get him an extra tutor to, like, if not, to tutor him, if not, he wasn't going to pass SAT. So they decided to, exclude him from the family vacation. So everybody in the family, like I said, they booked, everybody in Paul's family, they booked that flight MH35, and he traveled, essentially. Now, Paul was left alone in the house, right? And he was kind of very sad about it because he was going to miss his vacation, right? He was going to miss the yearly vacation, right? But Loki was kind of excited about it too because, he had the whole house to himself. So that morning, he decided to play video games. And he played video games with his friends. And then he got to a point, he was like, you know what? So while he was in his friend's house playing video games, right? His friend's dad ran inside the house and he was panting, and he was like, he was throwing up the cushions in the living room and throwing everything up, and he was very frantic about it. So they were like, what's up? And then he found the remote control and just like rushed the TV and changed the channel, and he put it on like CNN, and there was this breaking news, and the breaking news was that flight MH35 had disappeared. Like, the flight had gone missing, and they were looking for the flight. In fact, the flight had gone missing for a few hours now, and there was no traces of the flight. The flight had just, poof, disappeared. They didn't know where the flight had gone. Nobody knew where the flight had been. Crazy stuff. So immediately Paul saw that, he was like, it's flight MH35. I've heard this flight name before, So while he was still thinking about that, it was like he was going to go home because obviously the video game, their LAN party was over, right? The video game was over. He had to go back to his own house. So on his way home, when he got home, he saw that his phone was just, he had 73 missed calls, His phone had rang 73 times and he had missed it. And the only person calling him was his uncle. His uncle just kept calling him. The name of his uncle is Uncle Peter. Let's just give him Peter, Uncle Peter, right? And Uncle Peter had been calling him. So he eventually picked up the phone, and he was like, why did you call me 73 times? And Uncle Peter was like, he was panting on the other side of the phone. And he was like, so when Uncle Peter was able to, like, calm himself down a little bit, he asked him that, does he know the flight number that the rest of his family were on? And Paul was like, that you should give me a second. Let him go and check the emails, because he was the one that actually booked the flight for them, right? So he went to check, and he discovered that the flight number was MH35. And he was like, so Uncle Peter was like, well, flight MH35 has gone missing, and we can't find, and the flight is nowhere to be found, right? So immediately they became, they both entered into a panic, and they were panicking. And a day went by, and there was no traces of flight MH35. 2 days went by, no traces. 3 days, no traces. 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 3 months, 5 months, 6 months, still no flight MH35. Not even like debris were found. Nothing, not a black box, nothing. She just vanished, poof, into thin air, right? So, now remember I said everybody in Paul's family usually took this vacation. The only two people in the family that didn't go was Paul's uncle, Uncle Peter, and Paul. So the only family Paul had left was, surprise, surprise, Uncle Peter, right? So him and Uncle Peter and the neighbors, they kind of like, they convinced them that, look, these things happen. You might never, this is one of the things in life you might never get a closure on. Your family, maybe they are dead, they are with God now. Maybe they crashed into the ocean and nobody found the debris, yada, yada, yada. Just let's give them a burial. So they came together and they had this burial, this, mock burial, if you will, for Paul's family, right? And Paul was very devastated about that. He stopped preparing for his SAT. He became super depressed. But the upside to it, you say behind every dark cloud there's a silver lining, right? So the silver lining to all of this was that, Paul's parents, like I said, they were stinking rich. So all that money from Paul's parents automatically became his own because, it was the only family left, right? And all the money from his extended and the nuclear, everything just belonged to him now. And then on top of that, his uncle too, because all of a sudden he lost Uncle Peter, right? He lost all his own family in one day, and he was already 87 years old, which is why he was not allowed to travel in the first place because of his health. His health was deteriorating very, very fast. So he wrote a will, and surprise, 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 who did he will all the money to? Well, once again, Paul. He willed all the money to Paul. So that whole episode gave Paul like a lot of notoriety. He became very, very popular. Not for a very good thing. He became popular for being the guy that, number one, lost his whole family in this famous flight that vanished into thin air, literally. And then number two, for being the kid that got rich overnight. He got rich overnight from his own family, and now his uncle is bidding billions of dollars to him. So he became like this extremely rich motherfucker, right? So like I said, he became very popular for all the wrong reasons. And everybody wanted to be his friend. All the girls wanted to fucking date him. But he knew it wasn't like that before. Before the money, he was kind of like this nerdy guy. The only friends he had was like the guys he played video games with, played Fortnite with, Those are the only guys that he had, played video games with. Those are the only guys he had. Those are the only friends he had, So he kind of knew all that love was fake love, essentially. And that was like eating him out, right? I was just tired of the whole thing. So one of the girls that was dating him for true love in quotes now, right? Saw that he was kind of slipping into depression. So she advised him that, look, you have all this money. What good would it be for you to have all this money and, number one, not be able to enjoy it? Now, she said that because she wanted Paul to take her on a vacation, wanted them to like go on vacation to Santorini, right? And Paul wouldn't travel except he felt well. So she arranged like she had a therapist, right? So she called up therapist beforehand and told the therapist that, hey, look, I'm dating this guy. His name is Paul. He has all this money. The only problem is he's depressed out of his mind. But I want to go to Santorini, and so I'm going to send him over to you, and I want you to advise him to travel, essentially, and tell him that, traveling is going to solve all his problems. So, Paul took the bait, essentially. So they had sex one night, and then she, they had like this pillow talk, and then she told Paul that, hey, Paul, you know what? Maybe you should talk to my psychologist, talk to my therapist. And Paul was like, okay, what's the harm in talking to a therapist? So the next day she drove him to the therapist, and they sat down, and the therapist pretending that she was just hearing the story for the first time, and Paul was crying, and the therapist was crying, and it was such a like very, it was very heartfelt, essentially. The session was a very heartfelt session, right? And then the therapist suggested to Paul that, he should travel. He should travel the world. And if he traveled the world, he would, it would like take his mind off everything he has lost, and maybe, he would meet new people, and that would like, that would ease his guilt. Guilt because Paul felt responsible for the death of his family because, surprise, surprise, he was the one that booked the MH35 flight, right? So he just felt he killed all of them, essentially. So he didn't really want to take the therapist's advice, but at the same time, he didn't want to keep being depressed, so he wanted to move on, right? But the problem with Paul was a very spontaneous motherfucker, right? He wasn't a very, he wasn't a, think things through kind of person. He was very, very spontaneous. So as he left the therapist's house, his girlfriend was downstairs, and she, the therapist like kind of winked at her that, look, I did my part. You're probably as good as you're as good as gold now. You're probably going to be in Mykonos in a few days, right? In Santorini in a few days, right? But Paul told her that he wasn't going to get in the car. He just wanted to walk, right? So Paul started working and started thinking about it. And he was like, okay, so where am I? I'm traveling. I'm going to see the world. Where am I going to go? Where am I going to go? Where am I going to go? And then just made up his mind right there and there that, you know what, fuck it. He likes animals. And he had pretty much seen Europe because, you know, like I said, his family had this tradition of traveling the world every summer, right? So they had toured the whole of Europe, right? But the only place he hadn't gone to, which was where they were supposed to go to the next year, right, was Kenya, was safari in Kenya. So it was like, you know what, fuck it. I'm just going to go to Kenya, right? So like I said, Paul's a very spontaneous motherfucker. So instead of going back home to like pick his stuff, he just whipped out his phone and booked the first flight he could find to Kenya. And it was around 4:30 in the afternoon when he left the therapist's office. And by the time he came to the conclusion of going to Kenya, it was already around 6:00. And remember I said he had been walking, right? So it was just about 25 minutes to the airport. So he was like, you know what, fuck it, let me just trek to the airport like this. So he strolled to the airport, checked himself in, no baggage, nothing, just the shorts that he wore to the therapist's office. And you know, he checked himself in, got on the flight, and you know, the flight to Kenya was a little bit stressful, and he got there, right? So when he landed in Kenya, it was around 3 a.m. when it landed in Jomoto Kenyatta International Airport. I hope I'm saying that correctly. It was around 3 a.m. in the morning. So they checked him into an hotel. He checked himself into an hotel, nice hotel. And he had on the plane. So before he boarded the plane, right, while he was waiting for the plane, you know, I said he got to the airport around 7, right, and his flight was around 9:30, right. He had, you know, booked a tour like of his safari with the booking company, the tour guide. We're touring to a company, right? He booked like a safari tour guide, right? Safari tour, right? So he booked that tour and he got on the flight. So now the tour was for 10 a.m. in the morning. He got to Kenya at 3 a.m. Right? Now because of jet lag and what have you, right? He slept off, right? And then instead of waking up at 10 a.m., he woke up at 10:30 a.m. So he was 10 minutes behind schedule. So immediately he woke up, he was like, fuck, I'm late. So he got down and just rushed, you know, took the hotel taxi and just rushed to the safari. So when he got to the safari, the tour bus had already gone, you know. The tour had already started. So he was like, you know what, fuck it, I'm just going to explore the safari myself. What harm could happen, right? So he started wandering around in the safari. And he started wandering around in the safari. And then he got lost in the safari. And then he discovered that he got lost in the safari. And he was like, okay, what am I going to do now? Let me try to trace my step back. So he turned back and he was trying to trace himself back. And then he saw a dodo, right? Now, dodos are these like birds that are technically extinct. They've gone extinct, right? So he saw one and he was like, the fuck? Now, by the time he saw the dodo, he had been perambulating inside the safari for about an hour. He was just like doing zigzagging around all like this rainforesty part of the safari, you know, like there were a lot of trees there. So it was just like zigzagging around those trees. And then all of a sudden he saw this dodo and he was like, that's strange. That, you know, they're extinct. But, you know, again, I said, this guy's just coming from he's in a depressive episode. So his mind was not clear and he was like, fuck it. Shit happens. So he kind of ignored it, and then the dodo like flew away. And then he heard like birds chirping, and he was like, you know what? He saw a path, and he was like, let me just explore that path. And then he went down that path, and then now again he saw a dodo, but this time it wasn't just one dodo. It was one dodo and about 20 other dodos. And he was like, the fuck? Dodos are extinct, bro. Am I dreaming? And then, but again, the dodos flew away, you know. But this time it was 20, right? Initially, I chalked it up to himself being depressed or something, but now, you know, 20 dodos, that's like a lot of dodos, bro. Like, it doesn't like, that is not depression. That, you know. So it was like, the fuck is happening? Okay. So while he was still contemplating that, a hand tapped him on his shoulder, and then he turned, and then voila, it was a tour guide. And he was like, hey, I missed my way, and he was trying to explain to the tour guide, like, look, I just came from America. I landed 3 a.m. yesterday. I had your company for touring, but because I came late, I missed by the tour bus, and now I've been lost. But I'm glad I found you. And then the craziest thing just happened. I just saw some dodos flying away, and and he was saying all these things to the tour guide, and the tour guide was just staring at him. The tour guide had this blank stare on his face, and he was like, "What are you saying, bro?" And Paul was like, okay, and then he finished. Was like, okay, say something. What? Just lead me out of here, right? And then the tour guy took out his phone, right? And then he had he printed and he had this little thing on his hand, this little paper on his hand, and he told Paul to and then he knelt down for Paul, and he gave Paul that piece of paper and told Paul to sign it. That Paul shouldn't be angry, that he has to leave his presence and he has to attend to other things. He had other things to attend to, that he has to go right now. Paul was like, what does he have to attend to? He was like, the political debates. That is Paul doesn't want to see the political debates. And Paul was like, political what? It's a political debate. That there was a debate, the two candidates going for presidency, they were debating. And it was going to be a big show, and he wanted to be there. And Paul was like, And then Paul was like, it's Kenya, maybe Kenyans doing Kenyan things. Who cares, bro? Nobody cares, right? He's like, fuck it. So it was like, so, okay, you want to go and see a debate, right? So why on God's green earth are you kneeling down? Why you're on your knees? It doesn't make any sense. Why on God's green earth are you kneeling? But, Paul was like, who cares? Again, I said it was in a depressive episode, so it was like, fuck it. Right? So he signed the guy's papers, and then he was like, okay. So he was like, okay, I'm just going to go back to my hotel now. So the tour guide took his hand, and then he led him out and led him to, the tarmac essentially. And then Paul whipped out his phone, and then he took a taxi, and then he went back to the hotel. But the strangest thing happened in the taxi. Number one, when the taxi stopped, right, the taxi driver dashed out of the car, ran out, and opened the door for Paul, and kind of was like dusting his hand, dusting his leg, dusting, every Paul's body. He had this tray on his hand, and he gave it to Paul and said that, he knelt down once again and said Paul should pick any of the drinks that he wanted. So Paul was like, what is happening? But he was like, okay, maybe, Kenya, the whole economy is based on tourism. They are just being extremely nice, right? So they got in the car. He got into the taxi in the back seat. And the driver asked him the song he wanted to hear. And Paul was like, he should play anything. And the driver was like, he's so sorry. He wouldn't want to offend Paul. That I wasn't going to play anything. But, he was going to whistle Paul's name. He was going to sing Paul's name, from till they got to their destination in the hotel. So, the driver started whistling and singing Paul's name. He was just singing Paul, 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 Paul. And then Paul was like, this is weird. So by now I was really getting very creeped out, right? And then, it got to the reception, and again, he saw the receptionist, but he noticed that the receptionist he saw in the morning, she was very pretty, but she had like a mole on her face. She had this beauty mark on her face, right? And for some very weird reason, this new receptionist looked exactly like her, but the mark was missing. So Paul was like, maybe I rushed out in the morning, depressive episode. So they gave him the key to his room. The room number was room 701. They checked the name, Paul, everything aligned. They checked the name, and they said he didn't have any reservation there, actually. And then he was like, no, I do have a reservation here. I just left here this morning. And they were like, oh, you did? Yes. And then he brought out the hotel keys and he showed it to them, and it was room 701. And they were like, we're sorry, we don't have a reservation here, but you said you have one. So they took him upstairs. And they took him to that room that he wanted, to the room that he said he was staying in, that room 701. And then, when he got there, he opened, and, he had no luggage, he had nothing. So it wasn't as if he was going to check and find his luggage. It was just the same room, it was everything. But, the whole thing was very creepy to him. So it was like, the fuck. So he decided to sleep, right? And then he slept, and because he was very tired, and the whole day was very weird. And then he slept, and he slept, and he slept, right? And then he came downstairs, right? And now, as he was designing downstairs, because he was very hungry now, I was going to go and get breakfast, right, for himself, right? And then he noticed that the receptionist was closing from a shift, right? And like I said, he kind of thought the receptionist was cute, so he wanted to talk to her. So he just, he said good morning to her and asked her if he could like walk her to her car. And she was like, sure. So he walked her to the car and they kind of got along. And she ended up like driving him to her house, They were so like, they kind of like hit it on immediately. And she drove him to her house, right? And then when they got to the house, they got to know each other, yada, yada, yada. They went to the park. They enjoyed the whole day together, essentially. But Paul noticed throughout the day that, everybody was being overtly polite, including the receptionist, right? She would not hurt him. She was just like, everybody was they were so nice. It was crazy, but the niceness wasn't genuine. It was performative in a way, but they were just so, he couldn't rap. He had never encountered that amount of like courtesy in his life, and everybody was just so fucking nice, and it was terrible. It was like, fuck. Okay, it was something pretentious about it, but he couldn't wrap his fingers around it. So they got home, and they got home now. The receptionist's house, right? Her name is, let's call her, I don't know, Sally. Let's call her Sally. Let's give her a random name, or Sarah, or Susan. Susan. Let's call her Susan. Okay, cool. So they got to Susan's house. They go to Susan's house, and then Paul, one thing that led to another, and then Paul and Susan had sex. And, the sex was like the best sex Paul had ever had, right? But again, like I said, because Susan was just validating him over and over again, she had like 10 orgasms, it kind of felt kind of performative to Paul, but, like I said, it was coming out with a depressive episode, but so he'll take anything he was offered, so he kind of took it, right? So Susan, like, pretended as if that, the sex was so good she passed out, but she really didn't pass out. She was just pretending, and she kind of like slept beside Paul. And then Paul woke up, and, the window, it was getting cold, and the window was open, right? So he wanted to like get up, close the window, and get back and snuggle himself back into the sheets, right? So he went to the window, and then he looked up at the sky, and then realized that, okay, it's cold, but, it's a very clear night, and the stars are out and everything. So he looked up in the sky, and then he thought he saw Orion's belt, right? He did see it, and then he looked up, and surprise, it was Orion's belt. But, the Orion's belt that he was familiar with it was flipped. The Orion's belt was like flipped, right? It was flipped, right? And he was like, I remember I know what Orion's belt looked like, but it is not flipped like this. But that is Orion's belt, all right? So he called Susan. He was like, she should come. And then because she was not actually sleeping, she was like, he called her the first time, and she pretended that she didn't hear him, that she was so deep in sleep. And he called her the second time, and she was like, Paul, did you call me? So she got up, and then she went to the window with Paul, right? She was like, why you called him? He was like, look up. And then she was like, okay, what? She said, Orion's belt. And then she was like, yeah, what's the problem? And then Paul was like, no, it's flipped. Then she was like, no, that's what Orion's belt look like. And she was like, no, you should Google it. And then he Googled it. And then surprise. Susan was right. Orion's belt had always looked like that. And Paul was like, fuck, bro. We have this, I took astrology classes when I was a child. I'm from this rich family. I took astrology classes when I was a child. We have this observatory in our house. Like, fuck it. You can't sell this one to me. Like, I've seen Orion's belt like 1,001 times, and it's flipped, bro. It's flipped. So I was very, very concerned. It was very convinced it was flipped, but there was nothing he could really do about it, right? So it became very distraught, right? And then it was like he was going to wait again. And then the next night he observed the sky again, and it was the same thing. It was flipped, right? So he told Susan that, look, like, he's very big on astrology and cards and tarot and space and everything. Like he has seen Orion's belt like 1,001 times. That definitely that is Orion. That is Orion's belt, all right. But Orion's belt is flipped, right? And Susan was like, okay. And then Susan too had realized that Paul was like kind of weird, right? He was very, very brash. He was very, very rude. He was swearing and saying all these curse words. And, it it was essentially like it wasn't as polite as everybody around. So she knew there was something off from him, right? So she asked Paul that, look, like, okay, explain yourself. Wait, you said something about coming from America, and it was like, yeah. It's like, right. So he said, just explain yourself. So he took his time and he explained himself, and he explained how. So Susan was like, and then now the story went like, it was very normal, right? But the only abnormal thing in the story was that it was going on about how dodos had been extinct, right? But all of a sudden in the safari, he saw dodos, and he was so sure that dodos had gone extinct, and now everybody's acting that dodos are like normal. And Susan was that they were never extinct, that they've always been around. And he was like, no, 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 they're extinct, and now he's seen Orion's belt, and Orion's belt is flipped, yada yada yada. And that's when it dawned on Susan that, Paul was maybe just the off chance that maybe Paul was not actually Paul was from the other Earth, on the other side of the universe, Earth A. And he had somehow traveled to Earth B, right? He didn't know, right? So how, like, he must have maybe he had somehow crossed to it, right? So she sat Paul down and she asked him to, like, narrate everything from the beginning to the end. And then he gave her, like, a lowdown of his life. And when he got to the part of the flight, MH35, right? She was like, flight MH35, right? And he was like, yeah, like my whole family was on that flight, and then he got men missing, and that was like, essentially, that's when his world started crashing down. Now, Susan's father, right, belonged to like a group, like a cult essentially. Like the Mason, how on Earth we have allegedly they are the Freemasons, and they are the Illuminati, and they're all just like enlightened cults, right? That like control the world in quotes, right? I don't know, right? So Susan's father too belonged to a cult like that, right? They were called the Sahendrin, right? They were like this like cults that were this purist cult that they shouldered the society on. They carried the burdens of the society on their shoulders, right? Now, because her dad was such a high-ranking Sanhedrin member, and Susan was the only child that he had, like, Susan became the Sanhedrin at a very young age. Now, one of the tenets of the Sanhedrin, one of the things they were most concerned about was they had also discovered that there was another Earth. There was an Earth called Earth A, right? The universe was a twin, and there was another Earth, and the Earth was on the other side of the universe. And he mirrored their own Earth. He had the same moon. He had a moon just like their own. He had Mars. He had Mercury. He had Venus. He had everything that their own planet had. And the Earth looked exactly the same, down to the people. Everything was like the same, just like tiny, tiny differences, right? Just tiny differences, right? And the Sanhedrin had like dedicated their whole life to finding a way of getting to that planet, right? Now they also knew that so how did they know all these things? Well, if you remember at the beginning of the story, I said that the Jonus in that lived in trees, right? They figured out a way of, like, they sent a couple of, I don't know, astronauts or tree astronauts, if you will. They figured out a way of teleporting from Earth A to Earth B by chopping down a tree, translating the tree rings into a serial number, and performing this weird ritual around it, dancing around it, and then they will be teleported to the base of that same tree on Earth B, right? So they did that, and they sent a couple of astronauts there. But when they got to Earth B, right, because Earth B was very primitive at that time, right? And when God created Earth A, he also created Earth B, and he created, humans on Earth B too, right? The Aljonus never existed on Earth B. It was just on Earth A. Sorry, the Jonus only existed on Earth A, right? They were never on Earth B, right? So when they were teleported to Earth B, they were kind of like, they were trying to figure out a way to come back, essentially. Because they had tried to do the ring reversing, but the whole serial number was like kind of like backwards. So when they chopped down a tree, the serial number was backward, essentially, because everything in Earth B is flipped, right? But they couldn't like figure that out, essentially, very quickly, because they needed all these tools to like read the serial number, properly translate it, right? correctly, right? And they had, because they had to like travel very light. They had like traveled lightly. They just, the only thing they had on was their suits, right? They didn't come with any equipment, so they were trying to essentially build up, manufacture their own silicon, essentially, manufacture their own computers and read the serial number from the trees, right? And that was going to take them a long time, right? So by the time they figured it out and they were trying to come back, right? God, the war in at B had already, in at A had already happened, and the Sky Jones had destroyed the old world, and God had come and created a new Earth, essentially, repaired the Earth, created humans on Earth A, and surprise, surprise, he put humans on Earth B. Now, when he put humans on Earth B, the humans were like, some humans, like, they encountered the three astronauts from the Jonas, right, that they had sent, right? And, people hate what they don't understand. People fear what they don't understand. They hate what they can't conquer. So they just, they do what humans do. They killed him. They killed them, essentially. They killed all those Jonas, right? Right? But before they killed them, they had their story and they told them of, Earth B, yada, 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 at A and everything, and how they came from that Earth, and how they were from a race called the Jonas, right, yada, yada, yada. They gave this whole long, winding story about it, right? But that story stayed, like I said, the Sahendran are like the custodians of that world, of Earth B. So that story was not like a story that was widely known. It was like a myth. It was like an urban legend in the wild, right? But the truth of that story was with the Sahendran. They knew the truth. They knew the truth. Now, Earth B is an Earth that was, they prided themselves on, like, it was this very, very overtly political correct. In this world we deal with political correctness, but that one was not political correctness. It was moral correctness. They were self-righteous. They were morally correct. They had this chip on their shoulders. They were so, they were not technologically advanced. They were morally advanced, right? To the point that you could not like kill a mosquito. If you killed a mosquito, you'd go to prison. And most of the people in prison, there were people that accidentally stepped on a bug or accidentally killed a mosquito. It wasn't like, they were there for murder or for killing or no. It was like you killed a mosquito, you stepped on a bug, and there was no law enforcement essentially. There was no law enforcement. Like, if you stepped on a bug or you killed a mosquito or you did something like that, you would report yourself to, you go to the prison. There was no judge. There were no judges. There was no judiciary system. No. It wasn't necessary. It was a self-righteous world. So the prisons, you would like put yourself in prison and serve the sentence that you think is commensurate to the life that you took, or to the offense that you committed. You would serve that sentence by yourself, right? And then you leave, right? There was no qualms about it, So it was this very, very self-righteous world, right? And that was like literally the only difference between Earth A and Earth B. It was every other thing was the same, but on Earth B, everybody was self-righteous. They evolved differently, essentially. They evolved to this very self-righteous, like, species, essentially, right? And they were kind of like tired of it because that whole self-righteousness, right, goes against human nature, right? The only way human can be righteous is through Jesus, right? So that whole self-righteousness thing was like pissing them off. But, it was their tradition, it was their way of life. And anybody that tried to step out of the line, that person was ostracized because they wouldn't even kill people. They wouldn't even kill you because that was barbaric, So they wouldn't even kill. They would just ostracize you, right? So they were like, exiled essentially. So nobody wanted to do that. Nobody wanted to. So everybody conformed essentially. Everybody conformed in Earth B, right? Everybody conformed to that self-righteousness. Okay. But they were sick of it. Everybody was sick of it because it didn't meet the scale. They just had to be nice to themselves, yada, yada, yada. And it was so, their system was such in a way that, it was like democracy, but it was like communism. The way you would get rich was not by like selling things. No, it was how nice you are, how good of a person you are, right? So for that to be, so they kept scores essentially. They had to keep scores. So they always went around with this receipts, right? When you interacted with a person, the person that you interacted with would literally review you. You understand? They will review and say how nice you are as a person, how polite you are as a person, and they will rank you. And the amount of rankings the higher you ranked, the higher you went in society, essentially. The more people thought you were very polite, very nice, the more you went in society, higher you ranked in society, essentially. So the Sahenjin were like this super nice people, super polite people that were on top of the society. Do you understand? And the poor people in the society were essentially bad-mannered people, if you will, right? So this is why a little exposition. So this is why Paul everybody was acting weird around Paul, essentially. This is why when he encountered the tour guide in the safari, the tour guide was kneeling down for him, because the tour guide it was the review, right? The tour guide wanted him to review him and get a good review. Do you understand? That's why everybody was being nice. That's why the taxi driver was whistling his name, because the whole world was based on, it was a review-based system. It was a review-based world. It was crazy. It was really, really crazy. But they were, again, like I said, they were tired of it. They were tired. They were sick and tired of that world. Do you understand? They wouldn't even, like, they were like vegans. They were not, okay, they were not like vegans, right? They would kill, and they could kill animals, right? And eat animals and eat beef and everything. But, they had to, the animal had to, like, consent to the death. Do you understand? So you would go to, like, to a ranch, right? And the process was, you would go to a ranch, you would, like, pass in front of the animals that, you wear this device on your head and pass to the animals, right? So if an animal liked you, the animal would, signal that he liked you, because the animal's brain, the animal's brain was also wired, right? So there's a part of the animal's brain that would trigger that, maybe the animal kind of likes you, right? And then you would essentially, so if it was the animal that liked you, essentially you would take permission from the animal, in the sense that there was a way they could augment, like, the RTPJ, the right temporal junction of the animal, essentially, ish. So the animal could make decisions like a human being for a split second. And then if the animal wanted to like you, and then the animal would, essentially give you consent to kill it, essentially. And then and only then would the animal be killed, and you would have to kill the animal yourself. And the whole process was humane. Essentially, you would, like, they would carefully, like, essentially the whole process was, this is not the point of the story, but essentially the whole process was humane, and it was very ethical, and it was, it was this very, like I said, self-righteous world, right? But everybody was sick of it. But there was nobody in the whole on that whole planet that was more sick of it than Susan. She had it to the brim. And then when she met Paul was like a breath of fresh air. And Paul was here telling her that it was from this other earth. She figured it was from this other earth, right? And on this other earth, all those, like, moral correctness rules was not there. It was like, say what you want to say, swear when you want to swear, kill who you want to kill, do fuck up everything, and you're going to be fine. You might go to jail for it, you might die for it, but for the most part, you'll be cool, and you won't be the first person that did it. That's the best part. So everybody was like, So she was lost in for this world, essentially. She was lost in for Earth A, right? So she needed to go to Earth A, right? And then when Paul mentioned that his parents vanished in this flight MH35, right? It dawned on her that Paul was actually from Earth A, right? Why? How did she know that? Well, because, surprise, surprise, flight MH35 actually mistakenly got teleported from Earth A to Earth B, which is why it went missing. It didn't go missing because it's, it got crashed and it perished in water. Like, no. It went missing. It vanished because it was teleported to Earth B, right? That was why there were no traces of it. That's why there were no debris, no black box, nothing, right? Right. So what happened? So when she told Paul that then she explained everything to Paul, that, look, there's another planet. You're not on Earth anymore. You're on Earth technically, but you're not on your own version of the Earth. You're on the other side of the universe. This is why everybody's being nice to you unnecessarily. This is also why you saw dodos in the morning, and this is surprise yesterday morning, and this is also why the Orion belt is flipped, right? But Paul was not convinced, right? So she was like, I know you probably wouldn't believe me. So that flight that you talked about, that MH35, yeah, okay, cool. Let me take you to the flight. So lo and behold, she drove Paul to to the airport, and then surprise, surprise, Paul saw the plane sitting there. So when Paul saw it, Paul went like ballistic. He was like, "Fuck!" So where am I? He was excited because he thought obviously his family was there, and she was like, "Yeah, his family was there." But they had died. They were there and they had died. So he was like, he wanted to see his family. So she was like, "Okay, let's go to the museum, right?" She was like, it was like museum. They work at the museum now, and he didn't understand. So she was like, okay, and then she took him to the museum. And then when they got to the museum, right, it was very weirded out because the museum was not like a normal human. It wasn't like a museum because on Earth, right, when you go to a museum, you go to see artifacts, right. But when you go to this museum, you see people, you see bodies. It was almost like a mortuary essentially, but the bodies are like preserved and put into glass, and underneath it you see like a plaque with like what the person did, right? So in that world, right, because I said it's a very self-righteous world, like the just like every other world, right, they were also grappling with overpopulation, right? And there were two ways you could make it into the highest thing you could achieve in that world was not money. The highest thing you could achieve was like getting into that museum. It was basically their hall of fame, right? And there are only two ways for you to get into that museum. Number one is either you were exceptionally good as a person, your ratings were so high that when you died, you automatically went to the museum, or you volunteered to kill yourself. You killed yourself. Now, why would you kill yourself? Well, you would kill yourself because, like I said, you are so concerned, you are so weighed down by by the overpopulation that the world was experiencing, and you wanted to make room for like the younger generation, if you will, So you were like, oh, so how am I going to solve this problem of making room for the younger generation? This earth is so populated. Well, you'd be like, oh, fuck, kill yourself. So those are the only two ways you could make it into that museum. So everybody in that museum so people would go to the museum and go and look at this like, oh my God, these extremely good human beings. The same way people would go and see like, travel to Israel to go and see the apostles and, these guys that were like beacons of hope for humanity, something like that. And those are all their museums essentially. So when they got to that museum, Paul just started seeing human beings inside the glass there. And then he was like, so what is this? And then the girl kind of explained it to him. And he was like, it's kind of weird. Why would my family choose to come and work here? And then eventually they got to the end of the road. And then she opened this special door that needed a code. And then she entered it. And then voila. He saw his whole family just standing there. Inside glasses. Eyes closed. Half submerged in liquid. And he was like, he passed out, essentially. He passed out. And then when he woke up in his house. So, pause. So what happened between when he passed out and when he woke up? Well, Susan, like I said, Susan was part of the Sanhedrin. Her dad was also a top-ranking member in the Sanhedrin. Now, the Sanhedrin, all their life, they have been trying to go back to Earth. They have been trying to get to Earth A because they killed the three astronauts, essentially, for the lack of a better English, that the three Jonas sent to Earth B. And, they killed them, but they were able to, those ones told them that there was another Earth, yada, yada, yada. So they knew about the other Earth, and they were trying to go there, but they didn't know how, right? They knew there was a magic way-ish, but they didn't quite know the science of how to do it. And they've been spending all their money on it, essentially. So, Susan told her dad, essentially, that, hey, look. So Susan devised a clever plan. Her plan was that our only way of making it to Earth B was to... because, obviously, Paul did not even know he was on Earth B. So if he didn't even know he was at B, he probably didn't know his way back, right? So she needed help. Now, the Sanhedrin had, like, years of research, thousands of years of research on, like, everything they could have on, like, Earth, on our Earth, including, like, telescope photos. They even have, like, photos of other human beings that they've seen. Do you understand? They had all sorts of things, that they had seen. They even had some, like, some radio signals that are, like, wangled their way across, teleported essentially inside their own Earth B. So they had some, they had a few clips of, like, I don't know, let's say SNL, Sunday Night Live. They had, like, a few clips of SNL. They had, like, they had, like, a few shots of, like, 2012, like, Champions League final when Chelsea won the Champions League. I said, help Chelsea, help Chelsea. Sorry. They just had like this very cool. That's the only one they have, by the way. They don't, or that's the only record of any form of football that they have. That's Chelsea winning the Champions League in 2012. Sorry, and the one we won again against Man City. They have those two clips, and then focus, and then they have the Nigerian one when we won the Olympics too. They have the one where we won the 94 team won the Nations Cup and the 2001 team. So those are like the only references of like soccer they have in their life. So they have all these tiny clips of like broadcasts that kind of like teleported essentially into their world, and they were able to record it. So they know about Earth, and they know that Earth is this very unruly place. But they wanted to go there. But they don't want to go there as a group, right? Collectively they would shun that idea because, again, like I said, they were this very self-righteous bunch. But deep inside, they all wanted to go to that Earth because they were all tired of the whole moral uprightness nonsense, right? They were sick of it, right? But nobody would own up that they wanted to go there, right? So Susan knew that the only way for her to get to that Earth B was to, surprise, tell the Sanhedrin, right? But she knew that if she told the Sanhedrin, they'll probably do what they did to the members of Flight MH35, because what they did was the members of MH35, the plane got teleported and then they landed. They thought they had actually landed. They got clearance on the airport and they landed. But only problem was that the airport people were not expecting any flight MH35. They were expecting a flight MH36. And then a few minutes after, flight MH36 landed. So there was now two problems. There was MH35 and there was MH36. So immediately they notified the Sanhedrin, and then the Sanhedrin, quarantined all the passengers of MH35 essentially, and then they started questioning them, and very quickly they discovered that they were from Earth A, right? And then, but they were asking them to talk, and those people did not understand anything, and then they started torturing them essentially. They started until they were human beings. Those ones started swearing. They started cursing, they started breaking stuff, and then eventually, right, they had to kill them because they were, they could not stand that level of impunity. So they killed them. But now they killed them, and then they had to cover it up because it was already big in the news that, they killed them for two reasons. Number one, they didn't want anybody to know that there was another Earth. And everybody it was already in news that there was flight MH36 and flight MH35, and MH35 had this group of beings that were also supposedly on flight MH36. They looked identical to each other, so they were it was already making the news. So essentially what they were going to, their solution was to kill everybody in flight MH36 and kill everybody in flight MH35, get rid of the flight MH36 people, and then put the flight MH35 people in the museum and say that, everybody on the plane, while they were on the plane, they came to a decision, a collective decision to sacrifice. They were so worried about the overpopulation issue that they were let's just sacrifice ourselves for the greater good of our planet, yada yada yada. So they asked to be killed. Do you understand? And then they put them in the museum. So that was a cover-up story for putting them in the museum. So people in the museum will go and look at them and be like, oh my God, these people are so nice. Only God knows what the conversation on that flight must have been like. For them to have come to that decision, most of them were sacrifice their life for us. They will worship them, yada, yada, yada. So like I said, that's how they wound up in the museum, essentially. Okay. So Susan had made up her mind that, fuck it, she's going to... she was going to expose Paul, get to the Sanhedrin and tell them about it. But she was going to tell the Sanhedrin that, Paul is not aware. Paul has fainted and gotten himself into a coma and is not aware of anything that is happening, right? But they are dating, and he trusts her. So she's going to pretend as if she hasn't informed the Sanhedrin about him, right? Yeah? And she's going to try to extract the secrets diplomatically from Paul, right? And then she's going to come and tell the Sanhedrin the secret. So the Sanhedrin were because the last time the Sanhedrin tried to extract secrets from people, they ended up killing them, right? So they were okay, yeah. They kind of disagreed in the beginning, but eventually they were You can't be doing the same thing over and over again and be expecting a different result. That's foolishness. So they're like, okay, let's try our approach. And find out skipper's essential. She found him. And she has gotten this much information out of him. So let's see what else she can get out. Right? So they decided to place them so Susan took Paul back to his house, right? And then they gave her all these tools and they gave her all this they essentially briefed her on all the research that they've been doing on Earth so that she'll be able to check if Paul was lying or not, essentially. So they gave her all this information on Earth A, right? So she knew a lot of stuff. And so when Paul woke up, she decided to play both sides. So she told Paul that, surprise, surprise, you fainted in the museum. You fainted in the museum and the Sahendrian came to find you. And Paul was like, what is the Sahendrian? And then she explained what the Sahendrian was and how they've been trying to go to planet Earth A and how they are onto him now and how she's the one that is rescuing him. She rescued him, that he doesn't notice that they're no longer in a house. And he was like, yeah, they're no longer in a house. I was about to ask that. He was like, yeah, they're in a bunker. Like, you should look around. I was like, yeah, they're in a bunker. I was like, wow. I was like, so you're doing me a favor, you're risking your life because of me. Like, you don't have to do this. And the girl was like, no, that's okay. So essentially, now she wasn't supposed to do that. So she was playing both sides. She was playing the Sahendrian and she was playing Paul because she didn't care. She just wanted to get to Earth A. Period. So she told Paul about it. And then she told Paul that he would have to, they have 3 days, essentially. That eventually the Sahendrian is going to figure out that it was here. And maximum is the tops, you take them 3 days and then they'll come for his head. And then you end up like his parents. And Paul was like, that's not a bad thing when you think about it. That's not a bad thing at all. That he doesn't even mind. That, quite frankly, he doesn't want to. He wants to kind of stay with his parents, essentially. That wants to stay with the rest of his relatives. That on Earth A, he has there's nothing left there for him except his uncle. And if his uncle will probably be dead now because his uncle is his health was deteriorating very fast. So chances are he'll be dead anytime. So she was like, are you kidding me? He was like, no, serious. That he just wants to stay here. That since he woke up, he has lost before he even went, that the whole reason why he went to Kenya in the first place, he told her, was because he was depressed and he had no reason for leaving. And then the only reason why he was leaving before was because of his relatives. And now everybody that he ever loved is in us on Earth B, that honestly, he doesn't want to leave. But since she wants to taste our vulgar planet so much, that he's going to do everything in his power to help her get to Earth A. So he came clean to her, and then she had to come clean to him and tell him everything. Like, oh, look, I was trying to play you. Yada, yada, yada. So we reached an agreement, essentially, that she was going to get into the museum and mummify him and place him between his mom and his dad. A tube between his mom and his dad, essentially. But that would be only after he had ever helped her figure out a way on how to get back to Earth A. Right. But remember I said they didn't have any clue, right? The only clue they had was trees. They knew that trees was the source of it. And this is one of the reasons why the Sahendrian, the whole Earth B was so morally upright, was because they wanted a society that was so morally upright that, killing animals or killing trees or cutting down trees or any of those things would be legal, right? Because the Sahendrian knew that the only way to get back to Earth A was through trees, but they didn't quite know how. They shall know it was true nature, but they didn't quite know how. So the best way to do it was to prevent, they didn't want nature to be disturbed, essentially. Essentially, it's just like a crime scene. When a crime scene happens, the police comes and puts this yellow tape around the crime scene to prevent. Why? Because they don't want the crime scene to be distorted. They want all the evidence to be intact, right? So that's one of the reasons why the Sahendrian were so big on creating this moral society from scratch, was because when he saw those tree astronauts, for the Einstein, for a lack of a better English, when he saw them, right, and he told them about this Earth B, they knew the only way to get back, if they ever had a chance, was to preserve all the evidence that they have, preserve all the trees, because they don't want the wrong tree being cut down for wood, or if you will, do you understand? For maybe a footstool or a chair or furniture or something like that. Right. So, so the first step was So Paul asked Susan to like take him back to the tree, the original tree that they found the tree astronauts in. Right? Um, so they took, so Paul took, so Susan took Paul to the tree, and he was like, "Hey, look, this is the tree. It's in the woods, like yada yada yada." And so she was like, "Oh," and then and then she was like, "They don't know what it is, but they know it's something that has to be this circle, 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 right?" And then Paul looked at it and saw like rings, just saw 3 rings essentially, because they preserved that tree. They make sure it did not die. So the tree was kind of like a stump essentially, but it was still alive essentially, right? But like I said, they didn't know how to like they didn't know how to read it, right? So Paul was trying his best to try. He just saw it was 3 rings. He was trying his best to kind of like figure it out, and he did not understand, right? But as he was looking at the tree, right, he remembered that, he started thinking about how he got here in the first place. And he realized that the way he got there in the first place was like he was perambulating around the safari. He was looking for, he was trying to find his way, because he had been lost in the safari, right? He was trying to find his way back to the hotel, right? So he was perambulating, and it was a safari, because safaris don't, is like, grassland essentially. But there was one tree there. There was a couple of 2 or 3 trees essentially that looked like they were very big trees. So it had like this rainforest vibe to it. But essentially, they were just like a conglomeration of like 3 trees, just 3 trees just staying there. And it was like just like perambulating around those trees, right? And while he was perambulating around those trees, he was listening to he was listening to Erisugai. Let's use Erisugai. I wanted to use Enya, but let's just do Erisugai. He was listening to Erisugai, and he was listening to Erisugai's I don't know, China Rose. Yeah, he was listening to Erisugai's China Rose, right? So he noticed that it was kind of like, he noticed that there was a part of the song during like the bridge of the song that he was essentially, he for a second he forgot about all his sorrows, and he kind of like started like dancing to that song. He was essentially stepping to that song. So he was like, you know what? I don't think I'll be able to ever figure out this like I'll be able to ever figure out this like 3 ring stuff, but maybe if I go back to that tree in the safari and I just keep dancing, and I keep dancing, and I keep dancing, maybe I'll be able to find my way back to Earth A. Essentially, I'll be able to like trigger the effect again and just find my way back to Earth A. So by that time, their 3 day was almost over, and it was even like a week now, and the Sahendrian, they were getting impatient. They were getting impatient, and they were like, you know what, your system is not working. They were telling Susan that your system is not working. Let's bring this guy over. We promise we'll be gentle with him, but we'll get information we want out of him, right? So essentially, they gave her an ultimatum. Essentially, he was like, by Monday, if you don't have, it was on Saturday evening, and they were like, if you don't get any information out of him, we're going to, first thing on Monday morning, we're going to come and carry him from you, and we're going to do it our way, right? So they were in panic mode essentially. They spent the whole night around that tree, just like dancing. But they were dancing around the tree essentially. But Paul did not remember. He didn't connect the songs. He didn't know that he had forgotten the song he was listening to. It didn't click to him that it was. He just knew he was just dancing around the tree, right? He didn't even remember the song, right? Right. I just want to end this story now. What's the time? Oh, we're 1 hour 19 minutes. So essentially, they had given up hope. Essentially, that they'd given up hope that they were ever going to find it. And Paul was like, you know what? They should just let him be arrested by the Sanhedrin, and maybe Susan can come and be trying this nonsense anytime she wants. So they are giving off hope. But so on the Monday morning, right, just one last time, Susan was like, she would like to dance with him because she knew they were going to kill him. She was like, she would like to dance with him one last time, just one last time. That they should go to the tree and go and dance with him, right? And then they were like, okay, no problem. So they went to the tree together, and then they went to the tree together. So by this time, the Sanhedrin were already closing in on them. They were already gone to Paul's house to go and look to Susan's house to go and look for her. They hide out, and then they find out that she was not there. So they are already tracing them. They are already tracing them, and they were already tracing them to the park, to the safari, where to the safari essentially. So when they were there, Paul was like, he doesn't even have any strength to dance anything. And then Susan was like, let's just pretend as if this is your first time you're getting here. This is the first time you're meeting me. Let's just dance. And then, it occurred to Susan to just ask Paul and say, okay, which song were you listening to on the day that you came here? And he was like, I was listening to a guy, China Rose. And I was like, oh, okay. So they both, she played China Rose in her ears and on her phone. And Paul too put his AirPods Max inside, AirPods Pro, second generation. Is it second? Second generation inside his ears. And then Susan did the same thing too. And they were playing the same song in sync. I think they were using SharePlay. Let's say they were using SharePlay. I don't know. And they were dancing. And then the Sanhedrin was like, they saw the host of the Sanhedrin, because it was a very serious matter. So they came with all the helicopters. The helicopters were like circling those 3 trees in the safari. The special forces, they had come down. All the ropes are dropped, and the special forces, they were descending from the helicopter. Like all sorts of cars were parked with guns, and these 2 people are just dancing peacefully. And then Paul was just like, they should just like, she should close her eyes and then let them step in the name of love, essentially. And then they were stepping, and then they got to the bridge of that song, and then Paul just started like stepping. And then before you could say it by Jack Robinson, they opened their eyes, and surprise, surprise, they were surrounded by just nothingness, just absolute savannah. They looked around. There was no helicopter. The AirPods were on, right? So they didn't even hear anything, right? That's how good Apple's noise cancellation is. They opened their eyes and the song had finished, and there was no police. There was nothing. So apparently, while they were stepping, they stepped in the name of love, the power of love, essentially. So love transported them. I don't know what's his name. Paul, right? Essentially, it was power of love. Essentially, it was the power of love. He successfully repeated the sequence, and then he got transported back to Earth A. And in the eyes of the Sanhedrin, I was just going to like picture the scene where like all the helicopters are descending, cha 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 cha. All those special forces are descending, their goggles and everything, and the guns and everything, cha 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 cha. And then these 2 couples just dancing around this tree with like AirPod Max inside their ears, not Pro, second generation, and they are dancing around it, and then just when those like forces are they're just about to grasp them, like they just disappear. Pew! And then all those guys, they were like, no! And then, and then these people appeared on Earth A, and then essentially they lived happily ever after, and they never told anybody. She went back to Paul's house, in his rich house, and then they lived happily ever after, and they never told anybody about Earth B, and they never tried to return back there. The end. So the title of the story is, it's a short story. It's called Ibeji, the twin status. Okay, so why the twin status, essentially? In Yoruba mythology, there's this adage that says, we used to say it when I was a kid, like in primary school, they'll say Oruku Sindi Tindi, Oruku Sindi Tindi, Oruku Bigba Gogun Olole Turo. Essentially, Oruku is like the universe, right? So Oruku Sindi Tindi, Oruku is like, Tindi is like it's like Pretty Oruku, essentially. So Pretty Oruku. Oruku had like 1,000 children, and all of them. Tiro is like makeup, essentially. It's like eye pencil. So Oruku had like 1,000 children, and all of them came out with they all came out looking identical with eye pencil, makeup was on fleek. They literally, you know that Beyonce song, I woke up like this. Essentially, they literally woke up like this, right? But in this story, right? So I took that adage essentially, yeah, or whatever it says, and then I, you know, with the help of God, I crafted this story out of it. I've actually had this story since like I don't know. This story came to me in Serbia, bro. Fucking beer. Yeah, when I was in Serbia, Belgrade. That was when like God dropped the story inside my head. Well, the story is very, very big. Oh. This is like me abridged, cut down version. There's another version of this story where there are actually supposed to be two protagonists in this story. Do you understand? But that one, you know, we're doing short story now, so I'm going to break it down. So this is like the twin Earths, right? So the next story I'm going to say is the next story I'm working on is called SPF 14.5. You know, SPF, you know, sunscreen that you put on your screen. But this one's SPF 14.5. Intergalactic Kayamata. So what is Kayamata essentially? Kayamata is like a love potion, right? So it's a love story that is like a love potion that is very popular in like northern Nigeria essentially. Like when you give it to a guy like this, the guy just becomes like your, he'll just be following you around essentially. So the next story is called SPF 14.5. Intergalactic Kayamata. This one is nice. Okay, but like I shall like it. Yeah, the format that is in my head, like God just drops in my head today. Yeah, I fucking love it. Right, and it's a love story too, and it's not very sci-fi. There's a little bit of that there, but it's just like it's like this romance under the sun, if you will. So it's SPF 14.5, intergalactic, aka intergalactic Kayamata. Okay, so that's the end. So the end of the story is Ibeji. It's a short story ish, the end. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to try to flesh out those other stories I've written. Apollo 24, Reception. I kind of don't like how I ended Reception. It just had too many bad endings there. I just kind of like wrapped it up unnecessarily. So I'm going to flesh it out. So Reception, Apollo 24, check. Reception, we're going to work on it. Which other story did I write? Starlinkers, definitely. I think it's kind of done. I'm just going to flesh it out a little bit. Which other story did I work on? Buddha, like that story of Bodhina. Yes, I'm going to flesh it out a little bit. Today, all this thing I'm saying is today, because I want to compile everything I worked on this month of May, right? Because I worked on a lot of creative stuff this month, but I just kind of like, they're kind of like all over the place, if you will. Right, so I want to compile everything. And finally, did I mention, I finished this voice memo app I was working on too. So May has been a very, very productive month. And you know, what I like most about it is that it's very reminiscent of how like I used to work when I was like my daddy's death, pre-COVID, my daddy's death done here, which is like, you know, I'm not really doing anything, but I'm kind of like doing a lot still at the same time. Right? So I think God is finally starting to take me back to that point where I'm like, I'm not doing anything, but I'm still doing ish, right? So that's where we are right now. SPF, so sorry, the next story is SPF 14.5. So this month, essentially, let's recap. I think I did 6 stories this month. Plus this one now is 6 stories. I finished that voice memo app. I'm going to do like a demo of that voice memo app, and then hopefully I'll put it on the App Store tomorrow. I don't know. There's a part of me that wants to. There's a part of me that still wants to do this. There's this ASL like. I want to make the app like viable for people using, like, so for instance, if you're like completely clinically deaf, right, you can still like design your voice memo and it'll be fine. Use your voice memo and it'll be fine. And if you can listen to a voice memo essentially if you are deaf, because there will be ASL and stuff like that. I have a few days left in this apartment, right, before I move to my next destination. I can try to like kind of like squeeze it in, right? There's a part of me that wants to do that, but I'll make up my mind overnight. Maybe I'll ask God or something. Whatever God says I should do, I'll do it. So it's either the app comes out tomorrow morning, or it comes out. But before I leave this page, I'll make sure I'll drop it. I don't want to do any carryover. So that's it. So that's it for Ibeji. Between, I don't know. Between status. The end. Okay, cool. So I think from now on, what I'll just do is I'll just take like a piece of like riddle or a piece of like or a piece of poetry or something, and then I'll try to like create a story from it, because that's how this like That's how this area Ibeji came about. Yeah, when God just started talking to me about it, and I was like, Uruku Tindi Tindi, Uruku Tindi Tindi, Uruku Big Bama Gugun later. I was like, and then his story just came out of it like that. So I think that's what we'll be doing now. I don't know. I don't want to limit God. I don't want to limit your spirit. I don't know. So let's just discard this part. I don't know. I don't fucking know. I don't know. But this one worked kind of. Because I like the story. So next story again, SPF 14.5. If I don't make if I publish the app tomorrow, then there'll be, after I finish, then there'll be SPF. I'll do the SPF 14.5 intergalactic Kanyamata. But if I don't, then I'll be working on the app. So maybe Monday.